Fear grips China as mass murderers run amok. But the Chinese leadership is more afraid of the victims than the killers. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Chinese people are afraid. And not just because the Chinese authorities rounded up all of Earth's greatest protectors at this year's Halloween, like Batman, Spider-Man, and Deadpool. Okay, maybe not all of them were Earth's greatest protectors. But no, Chinese people are afraid because a flurry of massacres have struck the country recently, leaving them wondering when and where the next attack will hit. In the middle of November, a driver who was reportedly upset about the settlement of his divorce rammed his car through a crowd at a sports center in Zhuhai, killing 35 and injuring 43 in the deadliest such attack in recent Chinese history. Can't imagine why anyone would want to divorce a sweet man like that. Only a few days later, a former student at a vocational college in the eastern city of Wuxi, who was allegedly distressed after he failed to graduate, went on a stabbing rampage at the college, killing 8 people and wounding 17. And the following week, kids had to run for their lives in the central Chinese city of Changde as a driver tried to run them over outside of an elementary school for unknown reasons. According to Chinese observers, there have been 11 similar attacks in the past 6 months, and nearly 100 attacks in the past year. They're happening everywhere, at schools and universities, at shopping centers and malls, and at hospitals. You know how bad it is when it makes me grateful to be in America, where our mass shootings don't make people nearly as frightened? The recent attacks have led frightened users on Chinese social media platform Weibo to post things like, "The car ramming in Zhuhai is so scary to think about. Officials in Zhuhai are trembling right now. And the casualty figures are staggering and my sense of insecurity is going up, up, up." But, according to Chinese state media, there's no reason to be afraid because the Chinese Communist Party and the top authorities are taking action and putting public safety at the top of the agenda. Oh, good. The CCP is in charge of safety. That always works out so well. China's Supreme Court vowed after the attacks to firmly deter major violent crimes, extreme crimes, and crimes that endanger public safety. Even Chinese leader Xi Jinping himself came out emphasizing the importance of resolving disputes in time, preventing the occurrence of extreme cases, and making every effort to safeguard the security of people's lives. Because if anyone knows how to peacefully settle a dispute, it's Xi Jinping. Just ask Taiwan. He also told local officials to take control of risks at the source, which means heavy-handed crackdowns, surveillance, and censorship. Because the best way to stop the rampaging of an angry and repressed population is more repression. Authorities have been told to monitor and identify people that suffer from the 4 lacks and 5 frustrations. Imagine living in a country where your government talked like that. The 4 lacks are people who lack a family, job, normal social interactions, and assets like a house or a car. Yes, if you're not married, the CCP wants to monitor you. It's nice someone cares about you. The 5 frustrations are failed investments, estranged relationships, feelings of being thwarted in one's daily life, loss of emotional stability, and suffering from mental illness. I would argue that having your team lose a big game should be in there, though seeing folks react like this over a soccer match might also just count as mental illness. Now, the CCP has long used surveillance to go after people the party thinks might be guilty of thought crimes. But it sounds like quite a task to use the system to individually monitor such broad categories. As one social media user put it in a now censored essay, if you take a look at yourself in the mirror and be honest, do you think you might potentially fit any of these criteria? It's ridiculous. So I guess China's censors and security officers have to keep an eye on everybody? And if that makes them feel overworked and frustrated, they have to monitor themselves as well? Unfortunately, once the focus on public safety moved from rhetoric to practice, some of the official responses weren't just excessive, they were also often about doubling down on measures that the Chinese authorities were already taking to an extreme before the recent attacks. If we look at surveillance, for example, China is already home to 9 out of the world's 10 most surveilled cities, as well as 54% of all CCTV cameras. It's like the CCP read 1984 and thought Big Brother didn't go far enough. Combined with this, there is an army of censors. China has the most sophisticated censorship apparatus on the planet. So China is already thoroughly monitored, and that hasn't stopped these attacks. And keep in mind that constantly trying to keep eyes and ears on 1.4 billion people isn't cheap. In 2020, for example, the Chinese authorities spent around $210 billion on various social control measures, or public safety as they call it. That's more than what they spend on the military. But it was money well spent, since nothing bad has happened if you just completely ignore everything I've been talking about for the last 5.5 minutes. However, a lot of these expenses come out of the pockets of local governments, and local governments are already struggling financially after China's property crisis ripped a deep hole into their revenues from land sales. So to try and monitor poor, disgruntled people, you need to make more poor, disgruntled people. On top of that, local governments are still paying the price for the last time the Chinese leadership rolled out a good idea. China just doesn't have the money for this. Adding it all together, the prospect of new, expensive public safety measures might be more than local budgets can bear. So to spend more on surveillance would likely require cutting spending in other areas, such as social programs, which is already happening despite strong public opposition. It feels like the party can't stop themselves from making everyone disgruntled and poor. And here I thought communism always made everyone rich and happy. But the programs often at risk of being cut, like China's basic medical insurance for city dwellers and the guaranteed minimum living standards for rural residents, provide economic lifelines for precisely the kind of struggling Chinese people with 4 lacks and 5 frustrations that the authorities consider to be at high risk of committing violent crime in the first place. It seems like 5 frustrations minus 4 lacks equals one common problem, the CCP. So parts of the strategy don't make much sense in terms of ensuring public safety. But if we count in some of the other steps that the Chinese authorities have taken following the recent mass attacks, it seems to be less about public security and more about CCP security. Ah, there's a CCP we all know and know. With the wide-ranging measures already at their disposal, the Chinese authorities have launched sweeping crackdowns in recent weeks on any public attempt to address the killings. This has extended to foreign media as well, which were prevented from doing even general coverage of the attacks, with one BBC team reporting about the car ramming in Zhuhai being interrupted by a Chinese man shouting at them not to film and then proceeding to shove them away when they didn't follow his orders. If that guy is afraid of someone making China look bad, the call's coming from inside the house. Around the same time, a makeshift memorial to the victims of the Zhuhai attack was removed by the local authorities, with government workers swiftly taking away candles and flowers left by mourners. Surely this was for their safety. What if a fire started? Discussions about the killings on Chinese social media, often revolving around some of the key issues like economic grievances and mental health, have also been erased, making it very difficult to locate any sort of public conversation about the tragedies for very long. All this increasingly points to the CCP being more concerned about public reactions to the mass attacks than the attacks themselves. That might sound horrible, but it makes some sense when considering that the Chinese government's reputation is in tatters on the home front. In recent years, the Communist Party has moved from one series of policy disasters to the next. They've launched large-scale crackdowns against entire industries and some of China's most successful businesses, creating job insecurity for millions of Chinese employees. I've already mentioned the disastrous economic impact of the zero-COVID policy. The lockdowns took such a heavy psychological toll on the Chinese people that it might very well have contributed to the mental health issues that often seem to play a role in the perpetrators of the recent mass killings. Heck, the lockdowns in America weren't nearly as severe, and it did such a number on my mental health that I often wonder if I'm just hallucinating that I'm on YouTube and I'm actually just yelling at my toaster. But despite the extensive damage the Chinese government has caused to its own legitimacy, the party could at least cling to a narrative that China is among the safest places in the world. It still tries to hold on to this image with recent headlines like this one. But with the recent wave of violent mass killings, the low violent crime narrative sounds increasingly unconvincing. And we know the CCP won't be able to call on any DC or Marvel heroes to save them because they were all taken away at Halloween, even anti-heroes like Deadpool. Episodes like this wouldn't be possible without your support. Join us in the fight to expose the CCP by subscribing to our new premium website, ChinaUncensored.tv. You'll get exclusive episodes, live streams, and you'll really piss off the CCP. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.